Pam stood near the edge of the crowd, her smile polite but guarded. The event hall was filled with chatter, cameras flashing, and people moving from one small group to another, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. She had attended hundreds of such events over the years, but this one felt different. There was something in the air, an uneasy tension she couldn't quite name. When she walked in earlier, she had noticed the way a few heads turned. Normally, that didn't bother her. Being in public life meant people always noticed. But this time, the glances weren't friendly. A few whispered to each other, their faces tight, their expressions mixed with curiosity and judgment. She could feel their eyes on her back as she tried to settle into a quiet corner, pretending not to notice. A young woman approached her with a camera crew. "Can we get a quick comment from you?" she asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Pam nodded politely, assuming it was just a routine interview. But the questions that followed weren't about the event at all. They were sharp, personal, and clearly meant to provoke her. "Do you regret your past decisions?" the reporter asked suddenly. "Some people say your choices were politically motivated. What do you say to that?" Pam blinked. She had come to support a charity, not defend her past work. "I'm here to focus on the great work this organization is doing," she replied calmly. "Today isn't about politics," the reporter tilted her head, unimpressed. "So you're avoiding the question?" she pressed. Pam smiled again, this time thinner. "I'm choosing to stay focused on what matters," she said softly, then excused herself. As she walked away, she heard faint laughter behind her. Not loud enough for everyone to notice, but enough for her to feel the sting. She had learned to develop a thick skin, but she was still human. It hurt to be misunderstood, to be treated like a headline instead of a person. She found an empty chair in a quiet corner and sat down. From a distance, the event looked like a celebration of unity. But she could see how divided people had become. A few guests avoided her completely. Others gave her tight smiles before turning away. She couldn't remember the last time she felt so out of place. She thought back to when she first entered public service. She had believed in fairness, in doing what was right even when it was unpopular. Over the years, that belief had been tested again and again. Each decision she made came with consequences, some visible, some silent. She never expected everyone to agree with her. But she did hope people would treat each other with basic respect. That evening, it was clear respect had become selective. She got up to leave early, hoping to slip out unnoticed. But just as she reached the exit, she heard someone call her name. It was a man she vaguely recognized from television panels. "Pam leaving already?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Yes, it's been a long day," she replied politely. He chuckled. "Well, some people say you've had it coming. Public opinion can be tough when the truth starts catching up." For a moment, she stood still. There was so much she could have said. She could have reminded him that he didn't know the full story, that sound bites never tell the truth, that behind every public figure is a real person who feels everything. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled gently and said, "Maybe one day, people will understand there's more to the truth than what they're told." She walked away quietly, her heels clicking on the marble floor, the sound echoing faintly behind her. Outside, the air was cool and still. She took a deep breath and looked up at the dark sky. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and for a moment she felt small, like a single voice against a storm of noise. Yet something inside her stirred, a spark of calm determination. On the drive home, she turned off the radio. She didn't want to hear the news or the chatter. She just wanted silence. The road stretched ahead, empty and peaceful. Her reflection in the window looked tired, but her eyes were steady. By the time she reached home, she had already replayed the night in her mind 100 times. The faces, the smirks, the questions, they all blended into one long memory of quiet disrespect. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. She had dealt with criticism before. It came with the territory. But what bothered her wasn't disagreement. It was the lack of humanity behind it. People no longer wanted to talk or listen. They wanted to label, to divide, to tear down anyone who didn't fit neatly into their chosen narrative. Pam knew that speaking up again would only invite more attacks. But staying silent felt like surrendering to something worse, the idea that truth no longer mattered. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends. Some were supportive. Others were confused, asking what happened at the event. A few strangers had already posted clips online. twisting her brief conversation with the reporter into something dramatic. She read one comment that said, "She got what she deserved." Another said, "Finally." Someone called her out. She closed her phone and stared out the window again. She wasn't angry, just disappointed. In moments like this, she always thought of her father. He had once told her, "When people stop listening, keep speaking calmly. The louder they get, the more you must stay steady." Those words had guided her through every storm. She leaned back in her chair, holding her tea close, and whispered to herself, "Stay steady." The next morning, the incident was already trending online. News hosts debated it, influencers turned it into content, and strangers argued in the comments section. Everyone had an opinion. Pam scrolled through the clips for a moment, then set her phone down. She knew better than to get lost in it. People would say what they wanted. But the truth, her truth, wasn't going to be found in a viral video. She decided not to release any statement. Not yet. Sometimes silence spoke louder than words. She needed time to think, to choose her next step wisely. Throughout the day, she received calls from colleagues and reporters. Some offered interviews. Others wanted her reaction. She declined them all politely. There was a part of her that wanted to defend herself right away, but she also knew that reacting out of emotion would only feed the fire. Later that evening, she went for a walk in the park near her home. The air smelled of pine and rain. She passed by families laughing together, joggers listening to music, and older couples feeding ducks by the lake. It reminded her that outside of politics, life was still simple. People still cared about ordinary things. She sat on a bench and watched the sunset turn the sky orange and pink. A small child ran past her chasing a balloon, his laughter echoing through the quiet park. She smiled. That small sound, pure, free, unfiltered, felt like a reminder of what really mattered. Pam knew she couldn't control what others said about her, but she could control how she responded. She wanted to speak again, but only when her heart was calm and her message clear. That night, she opened her journal, the same one she had kept since her early career. She began to write, not for the public, but for herself. She wrote about the event, about how it felt to be misunderstood, about the line between criticism and cruelty. She wrote until the page was filled, then sat back and sighed softly. It was strange how easily people forgot that those in the spotlight were still human beings. Every insult, every rumor, every unfair assumption still left a mark. But those marks also made her stronger. She closed the journal and whispered, "If they knew the whole truth, they might see me differently." Pam didn't know it yet, but that quiet reflection would lead to something far bigger. The experience that left her humiliated would soon become the spark that pushed her to reveal something she had been holding inside for far too long. For now, though, she allowed herself to rest. The noise outside could wait. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new headlines, and new judgments. But tonight she wanted peace. The city outside her window glowed softly under the streetlights. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint hum of traffic and the rhythm of everyday life carrying on. It was comforting in a strange way. A reminder that no matter how cruel the world could be, it always moved forward. Pam took one last sip of tea and turned off the light. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. The truth she carried inside her wasn't going to stay quiet forever. And when the time came, she wouldn't be afraid to speak it. The next few days passed quietly, though the world around Pam was far from calm. News channels still played clips of that uncomfortable exchange from the event. Online debates carried on endlessly, twisting her words into things she never said. Some people defended her. Others tore her apart. She tried not to look at the comments, but curiosity always found its way in. Every time she opened her phone, there was something new. One post mocked the way she smiled, another accused her of arrogance, and another called her out for pretending to be a victim. Pam sighed as she scrolled. It was strange how strangers who had never met her could speak about her as if they knew her soul. Her friends texted her often, checking in. Most messages were supportive, though she could sense the hesitation behind some of them. A few people she thought were close didn't reach out at all. Silence, she learned, could speak louder than criticism. One evening, she sat in her kitchen, her laptop open but untouched. The sun had set hours ago, and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. She stirred her tea slowly, thinking about how quickly public perception could shift. When she first took office years ago, People praised her strength and confidence. Now the same qualities were being painted as pride and stubbornness. She hadn't changed, but the world around her had. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from an old colleague. "Lay low for a while. The noise will pass." Pam read it twice, then placed the phone face down on the counter. Laying low had never been her style. She believed that silence in moments of false accusation could sometimes sound like guilt, but she also knew that reacting too soon when emotions were high would only make things worse. She walked into her living room and stood by the window. The city lights flickered below, cars moving like tiny fireflies along the streets. Somewhere out there, people were going about their lives, unaware of the storm she was weathering alone. She had been through political storms before. This one felt different. It wasn't about policy or law, it was personal. It was about how people treated her, the tone in their voices, the way their words cut deeper than they realized. Later that night, she received an unexpected call. It was from a producer of a well-known talk show. They wanted her to come on and clear the air. Pam hesitated. She had promised herself to stay quiet until she was ready. But the producer sounded kind and understanding. "We'll keep it respectful," he said. "Just your side of the story, nothing more." Pam thanked him and said she would think about it. After hanging up, she stared at her phone for a long time. A part of her wanted to decline and stay away from cameras. Another part of her, the side that had always stood up for what she believed in, whispered that this was her chance to speak. She didn't sleep much that night. She replayed the event in her mind again, from the moment she walked in to the moment she left. Every look, every whisper, every smirk, it was all there. By morning, her decision was made. She was going to speak, not to defend herself, but to tell the truth. She owed that to herself. When she arrived at the studio 2 days later, she felt strangely calm. The makeup artist chatted with her politely, unaware of how heavy her thoughts were. The host greeted her warmly, assuring her that the conversation would be fair. As the lights came on and the cameras began to roll, Pam took a deep breath. The host started gently, asking her about the charity event and what had happened. Pam didn't dodge the questions. She spoke softly, choosing her words carefully. "I was invited to support a good cause," she said. "But sometimes people come to events not to listen or to learn, but to attack. I understand that comes with being in public life. But what happened that night, it wasn't about disagreement. It was about disrespect." The host nodded thoughtfully. "Many say you've been treated unfairly," he said. "How do you feel about that?" Pam paused for a moment before answering. "I've learned that fairness depends on who's holding the microphone," she said quietly. "When you speak your truth, some people will listen. Others will try to silence you. But staying silent only makes the noise louder." The studio was silent for a moment. Even the host looked moved by her calmness. Then she added, "I don't hold grudges. But I do believe people deserve to hear the truth, not the edited version, not the rumor, but the real story." When the interview aired that evening, it spread quickly. Her tone wasn't defensive or bitter, it was human. People saw the pain in her eyes, the steadiness in her voice. Many who had criticized her began to soften. They saw that behind the headlines was a person, someone who felt deeply, who had been judged unfairly, who had chosen dignity over anger. But not everyone was ready to listen. Some critics accused her of acting, of trying to gain sympathy. One headline read, "Pam plays the victim again." She saw it while scrolling late at night. Instead of feeling angry, she just smiled sadly. "They'll never understand until it happens to them," she whispered to herself. Her friends began calling again, this time with encouragement. "You handled that perfectly," one said. "You looked calm, strong, exactly like the Pam we know." Pam thanked them, but deep down she wasn't thinking about how she looked. She was thinking about what came next. Speaking her truth had opened a door. She had more to say, much more, but she wanted to say it right. Over the next week, she stayed quiet again. She spent time reading, walking, and writing in her journal. She replayed the reactions, the headlines, the public conversations. It amazed her how one honest interview could divide people so completely. But what struck her most was the number of strangers who sent her letters and emails. Ordinary people who had faced unfair treatment at their jobs, in their communities, even in their families. They thanked her for speaking with grace instead of anger. One letter said, "Watching you made me realize that staying calm doesn't mean being weak. It means knowing who you are." Pam read those words twice and smiled. It reminded her why she had chosen public service in the first place. Not for fame, not for attention, but to stand for something real. Still, she knew that telling the full truth would come with consequences. There were things she had seen during her time in government, things people needed to know. She had stayed silent before out of loyalty and respect. But the more she watched the public tear itself apart with lies and misinformation, the harder that silence became to keep. One afternoon she sat in her garden, the air warm and still. She could hear birds chirping and the faint sound of a lawnmower from a neighbor's yard. She closed her eyes and thought about the cost of truth. It was never free. It always came with a price. Her phone rang again. This time it was her publicist, sounding excited. "The interview did really well," she said. "People are talking about you everywhere. You've got invitations to 3 more shows. Everyone wants to hear from you again." Pam hesitated. "Let's hold off for now," she said gently. "I don't want to rush this." After hanging up, she sat in silence. She wasn't chasing attention. She wasn't trying to win anyone over. She just wanted to remind people what honesty sounded like. That night, she opened her laptop and began typing again. Not for the public, but for herself. A message, a kind of reflection, a note to the world that she might one day share. She wrote, "The truth isn't about sides. It's about courage. And sometimes courage means speaking when your voice shakes and standing when everyone wants you to sit down." As she wrote those words, she felt a strange calm wash over her. For the first time in weeks, her heart felt lighter. She didn't know when, but she knew she would speak again. This time more directly, more powerfully, and without fear. She was no longer trying to prove herself. She was trying to wake people up. Pam closed her laptop, turned off the lamp, and looked out the window. The moonlight spilled gently across her desk. Somewhere deep inside, she knew the moment was coming. The moment when she would stop being careful and start being completely honest. When that time came, she wouldn't hold back. For now, she waited quietly, gathering her strength. The world thought she was finished. But they were wrong. She was just getting started. The day Pam decided to speak again, she woke up with a quiet sense of purpose. She had spent weeks reflecting, writing, and thinking through every word she might say. It wasn't about defending herself anymore. It was about honesty, clarity, and standing firm on what she believed. She dressed simply in a modest suit, her hair neatly tied back. There was no need for flash or glamour. She wanted her words to matter more than her appearance. Before leaving her home, she took a moment to look in the mirror. Her reflection was calm, but her eyes held a weight. The weight of someone who had been judged unfairly but was ready to speak anyway. When she arrived at the studio, the energy was different from the previous interview. The staff seemed tense, the cameras more focused, the questions unspoken but heavy. Pam felt it immediately. This wasn't going to be easy, and she didn't want it to be. As she sat in the studio chair, the lights bright above her, she noticed the host giving her a respectful nod. He didn't interrupt or rush her. He simply waited for her to begin. Pam took a deep breath and spoke softly at first, almost like she was talking to herself. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about what it means to be fair, to be honest, and to stand by your beliefs. People often assume that speaking your truth is easy. It isn't. It comes with risks, with judgment, and sometimes with attacks that feel personal." The host nodded, encouraging her to continue. She spoke slowly, choosing every word carefully. "At a recent event, I experienced something that reminded me how quickly people can forget that we are human. I was treated unfairly, not because of what I did wrong, but because I represented a perspective they disagreed with. That kind of treatment is common in public life, but it's no less painful for being common." She paused and looked directly into the camera. Her eyes were steady, her voice clear. "I don't speak out of anger. I speak out of responsibility. There is a difference between being criticized and being disrespected. And when people try to twist facts or silence voices, it isn't just an attack on one person, it's an attack on the truth itself." The studio fell silent for a moment. Even the crew behind the cameras seemed to pause, as if her words had a gravity that could not be ignored. Pam continued, sharing her perspective without mentioning names or events in a way that would inflame tensions. "Throughout my career, I have seen many moments where the truth was hidden, manipulated, or ignored. I have learned that silence often benefits those who spread falsehoods, while honesty can be uncomfortable for many. But discomfort should not stop us from speaking what we know to be real." She took a deep breath and said the words that had been sitting inside her for months. The truth isn't partisan. The truth isn't about politics. The truth is something bigger than any individual or party. And sometimes the truth has to be spoken even when it is difficult, even when it is uncomfortable, and even when it invites criticism. Her words hung in the air. The host looked thoughtful, nodding but saying nothing. Pam felt no need for applause or validation. Her goal was not to convince everyone instantly, but to present clarity in a world that often thrived on confusion. After the interview, she left the studio quietly. Outside, the air was brisk, carrying the faint scent of rain. She walked to her car, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. She knew her words would spread, and she knew people would respond, some with understanding, others with hostility. But for the first time in weeks, she felt fully herself. The response began almost immediately. Clips from the interview circulated online. Supporters praised her calmness and clarity. Critics attacked her tone, claiming she was trying to manipulate public opinion. But amidst the noise, something remarkable happened. People began to listen. Ordinary citizens sent messages of encouragement. They shared stories of their own experiences of being misjudged or misunderstood. "Thank you for speaking calmly," one message read. "It reminded me that standing up for what is right doesn't require yelling or anger. It requires courage and clarity." Pam read these messages late into the night. She didn't respond to them individually, she couldn't, but she carried each one with her. They reminded her that her decision to speak had meaning beyond herself. It had inspired others to reflect on their own experiences. The days that followed were intense. News outlets debated her words endlessly. Political analysts dissected every sentence. Some headlines twisted her calm reflections into controversy, while others highlighted her integrity and courage. Pam didn't watch the commentary. She didn't need to. She had said what she needed to say, and now it was time to let it breathe. She focused instead on her routines, reading, walking, and writing in her journal. Each entry was a way to process the flood of reactions and to prepare for the next step. She knew there were more truths she wanted to share, things she had seen and experienced that were rarely discussed publicly. But she also understood that timing mattered. Speaking too soon or too harshly could overshadow the message itself. She wanted her words to be heard, not dismissed. One afternoon, she took a long walk along the river near her home. The water moved steadily, reflecting sunlight like silver ribbons. She watched people jogging, children playing, couples holding hands. Life carried on, despite the storms in her own world. It struck her how often people forgot that public figures were still human. They had families, fears, and emotions just like everyone else. They could be tired, hurt, or overwhelmed, but their struggles were invisible in headlines and clips. Pam stopped and sat on a bench, watching a group of ducks swim in the calm water. She thought about the concept of courage. Speaking the truth was never easy, and standing firm in the face of criticism required strength she sometimes doubted she possessed. Yet here she was, moving forward despite the discomfort, despite the whispers and the judgment. That evening, she returned home and opened her journal. She wrote, "Truth is not popular. Truth is not convenient. Truth is necessary, and sometimes the person who must speak it must do so alone, until others find the courage to listen." Her phone rang, breaking her concentration. It was a friend from her past, someone who had known her long before the media spotlight. "I saw the interview," the friend said quietly. "You spoke with grace." People needed to hear that. They needed someone to remind them that honesty still matters. Pam smiled, a mixture of relief and gratitude washing over her. "Thank you," she said softly. "It wasn't about me. It was about the truth." Over the next few days, invitations to speak began to arrive. Universities, organizations, and community groups wanted to hear from her. Some offered panels, others offered interviews, and a few simply wanted her perspective on the broader issues she had touched on. Pam considered each invitation carefully. She knew that every appearance would be a chance to expand the conversation, but also a potential risk. She wanted to speak thoughtfully, not reactively. She spent hours preparing, not for performance, but for clarity. She wrote notes, reviewed past experiences, and reflected on what she truly wanted people to understand. Her goal was simple: to make the truth visible without causing unnecessary conflict. Meanwhile, the online reactions continued to pour in. Some people were inspired, some skeptical, some hostile. Pam ignored the criticism that felt baseless and focused on the ones that mattered, the ones that sparked reflection. One email stood out from a teacher in a small town. "Your interview made me realize something," it read. "I teach my students about fairness and honesty every day. I've tried to model it, but often it feels like the world doesn't reward those qualities. Watching you speak calmly, clearly, and with integrity reminded me that those values still matter. Thank you for showing that courage is quiet, not loud." Pam kept the email close. It became a reminder that her efforts were not in vain. Speaking the truth wasn't about instant popularity or approval. It was about planting seeds that might grow slowly, quietly, and in ways she could not yet see. Even as the responses continued, she maintained her routines. She walked in the park, drank tea in the evenings, and wrote in her journal. Life had a rhythm, and she needed to remain grounded amidst the whirlwind outside. Then one night she received an unexpected message. It wasn't from a friend or supporter, but from someone who had criticized her in the past. "I didn't agree with you," it said simply. "But after hearing what you said, I think I understand a little more. Thank you." Pam read the message twice. She didn't feel triumphant, only a quiet sense of hope. Maybe people were ready to see things differently. Not everyone, but some. And that was enough to keep moving forward. By the end of the week, she realized that speaking her truth had done more than she expected. She had not only reclaimed her voice, but she had also reminded people of the value of honesty, clarity, and calm courage. She didn't celebrate with fanfare. She simply sat by her window one evening, sipping tea and watching the city lights reflect on the river below. The world was still noisy, still judgmental, still divided, but a small part of it had heard her clearly. Pam closed her journal and whispered softly to herself, "This is just the beginning." She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she felt ready. She had faced criticism, disrespect, and misunderstanding, and yet she had stayed calm, measured, and true to herself. Now she could move forward with the confidence that her voice mattered. The days after her latest interview were like nothing Pam had experienced before. She woke up to messages, notifications, and headlines that sprawled across the internet. Her words had traveled faster than she expected, reaching people she would never meet, sparking conversations she had only imagined in her mind. At first, the volume of attention was overwhelming. Every phone call, every email seemed urgent, pressing, and important. Reporters wanted updates, commentators wanted opinions, and strangers posted clips of her words on social media, dissecting every gesture and tone. Some praised her clarity, while others tried to twist her statements into something controversial. Pam sat at her kitchen table one morning, sipping her tea, letting the noise settle around her. She had faced criticism before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about disagreement. It was about perception, about control, about how easily truth could be bent into something unrecognizable. She opened her laptop and read through comments cautiously. Some were heartfelt, thanking her for speaking calmly and honestly. Others were cruel, accusing her of manipulation or claiming she was seeking attention. Her heart tightened at some of the words, but she refused to let them shake her. Her reflection in the dark screen reminded her of something important. She wasn't responsible for everyone's opinion. She was responsible for her actions, her words, and her integrity. That thought gave her a sense of steady focus, even as the storm raged outside. Pam's friends and colleagues reached out, offering support and advice. Some urged her to stay away from the media, to let the attention fade. Others encouraged her to speak more, to clarify, and to continue sharing her perspective. She considered each suggestion carefully, weighing the impact of every move. One afternoon, she received a call from a community leader who had been following her story. "Your words have made a difference," the leader said. "People are talking not just about you, but about honesty, fairness, and respect. It's rare to see someone speak with such calm and strength. You've reminded people that integrity still matters." Pam thanked the leader, feeling a quiet warmth. It wasn't about praise or recognition. It was about the realization that her decision to speak had sparked reflection in others. That was the reward she sought. Not applause, not headlines, but understanding. Despite the positive messages, Pam could not ignore the pushback. Editorials criticized her approach, suggesting she was trying to rewrite the narrative or protect herself. Social media debates became heated, with strangers arguing over her tone, her intent, and even her past decisions. One morning, she came across a particularly harsh post. The author accused her of hypocrisy, claiming that she had avoided responsibility in the past. Pam leaned back in her chair, letting out a slow breath. She had expected criticism, but reading it still felt heavy. She closed the laptop and stood, walking to her garden. The air was crisp and the sun cast a warm glow over the plants. She touched the leaves gently, letting the sensation ground her. She reminded herself that she had not spoken carelessly. Her words had been thoughtful, honest, and measured. That was enough. In the days that followed, Pam continued to receive invitations to speak. Universities, civic organizations, and community groups wanted her perspective. Each opportunity was carefully considered. She wanted to reach people, but she also wanted to ensure her message was heard accurately and thoughtfully. She spent time preparing, not for performance, but for clarity. She wrote notes, reviewed her past experiences, and reflected on what mattered most. Her goal was simple: to communicate truthfully, calmly, and with empathy, without stirring unnecessary conflict. During one of her speaking engagements, she addressed a group of students at a local college. The room was filled with young faces, curious and attentive. Pam spoke about her experiences, the importance of honesty, and the courage it takes to stand by your convictions. She shared her reflections on the recent event that had sparked the media attention. "Sometimes people forget that behind every public role is a human being," she said softly. "We feel, we worry, we care, and when we are judged unfairly, it leaves a mark. But those marks can teach us resilience, empathy, and the importance of truth." The students listened quietly, some taking notes, others nodding and understanding. When she finished, several approached her to ask questions. They wanted to know how to stay true to themselves in a world that often rewarded noise over honesty. Pam answered patiently. "It's not easy," she said. "There will always be critics, people who misunderstand, and situations that feel unjust. But if you act with integrity and clarity, you create a space for truth to be recognized even if it takes time." Back at home, she reflected on the encounter. The students' questions reminded her why she had spoken up in the first place. It wasn't about defending herself or winning approval. It was about creating understanding, planting seeds that might grow slowly but steadily. Meanwhile, the media continued to buzz. Headlines framed her statements in various ways, some positive, some negative. Pam refused to engage with every article or comment. Instead, she focused on what she could control: her own words, her own actions, and her own calm. One evening, she received a message from a former colleague she had respected deeply. "I've watched what you've done these past weeks," the message read. "You've handled criticism and misunderstanding with grace. It's inspiring to see someone speak the truth so calmly, even when it's uncomfortable. You're showing the world what leadership really looks like." Pam smiled quietly. She had learned over the years that leadership was less about being popular and more about being steadfast in values. The message reminded her that courage didn't always need to be loud. It could be quiet, persistent, and unwavering. However, not all reactions were supportive. Some people continued to spread rumors, question her motives, and attack her character. Pam read a few of these posts, then set her phone aside. She refused to let negativity dictate her peace. Instead, she focused on tangible work. She continued engaging with communities, participating in panels, and mentoring younger professionals. She used each opportunity to model calm resilience, showing that it was possible to stand firm without aggression, to speak the truth without malice. One afternoon, she was invited to a panel discussion on leadership and ethics. She shared her experiences, emphasizing the responsibility that comes with public influence. "We are all accountable," she said. "Not just for our actions, but for the way we communicate, the way we treat others, and the way we respond when faced with misunderstanding." After the panel, several attendees approached her. Some admitted they had previously criticized her in online forums, but wanted to apologize for jumping to conclusions. Others expressed gratitude for her honesty and composure. Pam listened carefully, appreciating each person's courage to speak openly. As the weeks passed, she noticed a shift. While critics remained, there was a growing acknowledgement of her message. People began to separate the person from the politics, focusing instead on the principles she had emphasized: truth, fairness, and calm integrity. Pam still spent quiet moments reflecting. She often walked in the evenings, letting the city's lights and the cool air remind her that life moved forward regardless of noise or criticism. She found comfort in simple routines, sipping tea, writing in her journal, reading books that offered perspective, and walking in familiar streets that felt grounding. One night, as she reviewed her journal entries, she realized something profound. The journey she had begun weeks ago was no longer just about defending herself. It was about encouraging honesty and courage in others. By standing firm, she had given permission for others to reflect, to question, and to speak their truths. Pam leaned back in her chair and looked at the quiet room around her. She had faced intense scrutiny, criticism, and misunderstanding. Yet she had remained calm, consistent, and truthful. That strength, she knew, was not born from avoidance or silence, but from persistence and clarity. She thought about the people who had reached out to her, friends, strangers, students, and colleagues alike. Their words reminded her that the impact of speaking honestly could extend far beyond her own life. Small moments of courage could ripple outward, influencing communities, conversations, and even hearts. As she closed her journal, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not because the world had approved her, but because she had remained true to herself. She had transformed the experience of being treated poorly into an opportunity to share truth, inspire reflection, and model integrity. Pam knew there would still be challenges ahead. Misunderstanding, criticism, and noise would never fully disappear, but she also knew that by standing firm in her values, she could navigate these challenges with clarity and resilience. She looked out the window at the city lights, a soft breeze brushing her face. Somewhere beyond the buildings, life continued. People laughed, argued, loved, and struggled. And somewhere in that vast, noisy world, her voice had found its place. It was quiet, steady, and full of purpose. For Pam, that was enough.